What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 118 of the Steam Deck Podcast, Flip Screen Games' weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. Just the dynamic duo today here.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's the OG team. It's the people, the two that people really love. You know. Well,
see, now that Max has the trophy, we can be on the same team and take digs at him.
100%. You know, and I think he cheated to get it personally. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I feel like there was a lot of collusion, and stop the steal.
He did pay me off. So
wow, you just immediately admitted that, huh? Remind me never to bribe you. Oh man, so we got a fun one today. We got a couple news stories. One of which is all about a new Decky plugin that is going to bring FSR 3 frame generation to a bunch more games, and it's already rolling out. So there's already some stuff to chew on here about that. But then another little interesting thing about Valve potentially bringing a battery charge limit to Steam Deck as well. So we got a couple fun updates for us this week. But tell me about this new Decky plugin. I know we talked a lot about frame generation. We talked about there was like that Spider-Man story a couple episodes back, and essentially you can kind of use this technology to boost frame rate and, you know, improve performance with less power in the hardware is kind of the goal of the technology. Whether or not it works that way, I guess, in practice remains to be seen.
Yeah, theoretically, that's what it's meant to do. So, as part of FSR 3.1, it brought the frame generation. The game needs to support FSR 3.1 in order to enable that. There's a few games. I think Cyberpunk 2077 supports it on Steam Deck natively, and you can turn that on. You want the baseline of the game to be running around 60 FPS. If you can't hit 60 FPS, adding frame generation, you would think like, oh, I can jump from 30 to 60 and it's going to be great and there'll be no problems at all. The latency it adds makes it feel like you're walking through honey, and it's really not an enjoyable experience. You will get some additional lag and some additional latency. There's no real solution that AMD has for this. NVIDIA has the NVIDIA Reflex, where it kind of compensates for it and tries to estimate and guess what you're going to do next and uses AI in order to do that. But this plugin specifically enables this frame generation for games that don't natively support it. What it does is once you install the plugin, if the game supports DLSS but doesn't support FSR 3.1 yet, it will replace the DLL in the game. So you can swap it out on the fly. There was a video by Deck Wizard that we'll link in the description that shows this kind of working, and he demonstrates it on games like Black Myth Wukong, Witcher 3, and Final Fantasy. And in that you can see that you can get jumps from like 60 to 90 FPS, and obviously the OLED screen on the Steam Deck OLED is a 90 hertz display, so you can get that jump and it looks like it's running smoother. Now, Wakahula, one of our Patreon producers on the Discord, said that he tried it. He said, just tried it with Tokyo Extreme Racer, which runs at around 60 FPS on low. It hits 90 with Decky frame gen, but then it has some weird reflection errors and crazy input latency. Not recommended for racing games, but gives a taste of what the Switch 2 may be able to do. So I think, for me, like, it sounds like frame generation may be this kind of secret sauce, and I think people were putting a lot of emphasis on, oh, this could be the key to get, you know, some of these newer games that don't necessarily run very well by default on the Steam Deck, and getting them to run and feel smoother. I don't know, having seen this, that it really brings all that much to the table. 60 FPS, I think, for me, has always been enough. Like, I usually, when I play a game, target 45 frames per second. It's half of the screen, the refresh rate of the Steam Deck screen. And so for me, that's always been plenty. It looks smooth enough and it feels smooth enough. So I don't know. What do you think? Like, is hitting 90 FPS something that you've really been like eager to do?
No, and I think I'm broadly with you, because like this is one of those like not pop psychology, but I guess pop science things that I feel like you hear people say, and who knows how true it is, that like there is a certain level of refresh rate where it's like it becomes less and less perceptible to your eye, right? And I feel like we've kind of generally agreed that 60 is kind of that number. So I kind of broadly agree with you that like I don't know that, like, I have experienced games with variable refresh rate on Xbox and PlayStation, right? Like on the Series X at launch, I remember there was like a lot of that conversation. It was like, oh, like you can play Ori at 120 FPS, right? And it's like
Elden Ring was a really good one as well because it smoothed out the bumps. That game is notorious for having a frame rate that's all over the place.
So I think that to me is where it's most interesting, right? Is like if you have games that are struggling to achieve that higher stable frame rate, like that's to me where it sounds most interesting. But like you made the point that like you kind of ideally already want the game running at 60 FPS to be able to take advantage of this, which to me feels like it kind of defeats the purpose. Like I think if you could like, take a game that was running at 30 and get it to run at 6, then you're like, yeah, that's a total game changer. That's huge. But this to me feels like a little bit, I'm kind of with you. It's like how important is 90 versus 60, especially if like Wakahula said, like you might have like input latency or reflection issues, like that totally, it's not worth it then.
Yeah, that's I think where I land on it. Like I could see this being useful. Say I've got a 120 hertz display or 240 hertz display, and I'm running this on a big rig, and I'm already getting say 90, 100 frames per second out of it, and I just want to be able to maximize it and get to what the refresh rate of my panel is, and just like hit that. And I think then frame generation can kind of put a band-aid over it, sort of smooth it out and just put some additional frames in between there. But they are generated, they are generated. The lower the refresh rate, the more likely you are to see one of those generated frames with the naked eye.
Let me ask you a question, because you brought up Elden Ring there, right? With and how it did benefit from that 120 FPS mode because the kind of base game was like, it struggled to maintain 60 FPS, right? Even though it ran at 60 FPS. How does that apply to something like this, right? If we're talking about like, okay, the game should ideally be targeting 60 FPS to take advantage of this frame generation. Does it need to be a stable 60 FPS? Or in like a situation like Elden Ring, is that maybe where the value in this technology really resides? Is like the games that are like almost 60 FPS, right? And they kind of sit in that like, I think they're dipping no lower than 50, but they really sit around 60. Maybe they dip into the high 40s, right? But like if you're in that 45 to 60 range, like could you not potentially close that gap between unstable 60 and stable 60, right?
Possibly, but like for something like Elden Ring, I kind of feel like that's where the latency, you 100% want it. Like you want to be able to parry, you want to be able to dodge and roll and move around and not.
You don't want to like have yourself lose a good boss run because of latency, right? Like that's gonna really piss you off, and it's just like nobody wants to play a game like that.
For me, I would play Elden Ring probably locked at 45 FPS. It will run very comfortably like that on the Steam Deck. Or if you're running an LCD Steam Deck, I highly recommend people run them at 40 FPS because the panel, that's like 2/3 of what the panel can do. It divides nicely into 60, so that's always been a sweet spot as well. I think with Elden Ring, Proton does a fair chunk to smooth things out. There is a lot of kind of bumps and things on PC, on Windows, but Proton, I know they put a lot of legwork in when the Steam Deck first launched because it was around the time when people were still like playing Elden Ring when it first launched, right? And it was like a great place to play Elden Ring, and Valve put the work in, presumably because lots of people at Valve wanted to play Elden Ring and were probably playing Elden Ring while on it. So I don't know that frame generation really would do much there. I struggle to see where the use case is for it on the Steam Deck because for me, like I've never once gone, oh, you know what? I wish this was running at 90 frames per second. Like even games that can run at 90 frames per second, I often cap them lower to save battery life, because the higher the refresh rate, the more the Steam Deck's got to push out, the more it's going to pump out, the more screen cycles it's got to run. Like for me, I kind of felt like it's just not worth it. But obviously, some people do. And I think it's nice to have the option. And this is a really cool plugin, a really cool mod that just allows you to swap it out. Obviously, mileage is going to vary game by game. I would imagine it's probably going to break some games flat out, just like destroy it as soon as you swap out the DLL. But it is easy enough to kind of swap back and forth between it.
Yeah, I think this is one of those like technologies that it to me feels very, very reminiscent of the way that we talked about cloud streaming, like at the beginning of this current console generation, right? Where it's like, yeah, like cool idea in theory, but the tech just isn't there, right? The internet infrastructure isn't there for you to really.
It's more like ray tracing, like that we were talking about on the Flip Screen Games podcast this week, and you were just like, I just don't give a shit about these fancier reflections, and I feel like most people are in the same boat as you. They just want to play a good game, and they don't necessarily know or care about like, oh, global illumination and like reflections that I can see is rendering something that's not on the screen.
Yeah, and you got to exactly where I wanted to drive, which is like, is this one of those things? Is this one of those things where this technology is in its infancy? And, you know, like we talked about it on Nintendo Noise this week. Jack and I talked about it, but we talked about it the last couple, you know, times we've talked about the Switch 2 and this, you know, DLSSR and like, you know, is this like upscaling and frame generation? Like, is that something that is going to end up being the kind of technological like wow moment that we had when we saw like, and I know I'm jumping on like all these different console examples. I hope I'm not confusing anybody. But like you think about Nintendo Switch 1 and its reveal trailer, right? And the first time that you saw that guy, it's in the dock and he picks it up and it's just immediately on the screen. And like, I don't know if everybody at home felt this way, but my initial reaction was, cool idea. Is that actually how it works? Like, is every game going to be that seamless? Is there going to be load times? You know, it's like, is this a trailer showing off an ideal scenario, or does it actually, quote unquote, just work? And this is one of those things where, like, I'm not sure what it is, because I think the ray tracing thing is like a really apt comparison, I think, because I think like that the locked 60 FPS, 4K gaming, the 8K stuff that we joke about, right? Like a lot of this stuff ends up becoming like line items on a PR release. It's bullet points for a commercial, and it's not really anything that like makes it.
Yeah, like I mean, you just got to look at the PS5 Pro's announcement. That it was all on that. It was PSSR. You know, we've got the PlayStation Super Resolution, and this is what we're doing. But I do kind of feel like we had that holy shit moment a long time ago with DLSS. Like DLSS is an incredible technology, and it's the reason NVIDIA is leading so heavily in the PC graphics space.
Right.
AMD is lagging behind massively on that, but FSR is open source. Anyone can contribute to it. Anyone can use it. There's Intel's XeSS. I'd imagine they'll have a solution for frame generation at some point. I don't think frame generation here is really the kind of use case that people want it to be. I think people want it to be able to go, well, I can jump from 30 to 60 FPS, and it's not really going to do that for you without introducing a lot of lag.
And I think that's my question, right? When you talk about this stuff, is like, is this the infancy of this technology?
I think so, yeah.
And you look at it and you're like, yeah, like, great.
See, I don't think people thought with DLSS that was really going to be it was like, oh, really? Using machine learning, and you're not actually rendering the image. You're using like neural networks to run it through and then upsample it. Is that really going to look right? Do I really want you, NVIDIA, to take that over? Don't I want the game developer to just put what they wanted to put on the screen and make it faithful? But I think everyone's come around to the fact that, no, this is fucking incredible technology, and internally the game can render at like 900p, but it can output a 4K image,
Right.
and the user has no clue.
And that's where I think this stuff gets interesting, because it's like some of it is going to be that sort of thing where it's like, to bring it back to the Switch example, right? You can be told something and it's really easy to be like, sure, but you don't know because it's new technology and you haven't experienced it, right? Like, I think like smart delivery is something like that, where like that's the kind of thing that like sitting down and explaining the technological, like how it's done, right, is something that'll make the average person's eyes glaze over. But if you tell them did you own an Xbox? Cool. Any of those games that you own, they run better now. That is like, oh, okay. And that, I think, is the differentiator between these things. Is like right now, it is very much that like early days niche technology. It's for the most hard of the hardcore who want to count frames and have a ticker on their screen and see I'm up to 90. Isn't that cool? Like, there is a type of person that cares about that. That's not the mass market consumer, really, right? And I think that when you do get to the point where this is capable of like the stuff that you talked about, or that I even brought up, right? Of like, this game's running at 30 and it can reliably double frames and it doesn't have latency and it doesn't have lag, in the same way that we're now looking at cloud streaming for the first time and being like, oh, like, maybe that technology is actually almost now 8 years after it was introduced, maybe it's actually almost usable, right? And it's like, we're not there yet, but 5 more years, 10 more years, there might be a segment of the audience or a segment of the market.
I kind of think it's going to be sooner than that. I mean, there's been a lot coming out of Microsoft earnings report, and you obviously got to take a lot of it with a grain of salt, because Satya Nadella's on the investor call wanting to big up his own company. Fair enough. But, you know, they're talking about how they've had record numbers of people using their cloud service. I feel like, I mean, I used it over the Christmas break. I know a lot of people anecdotally that were just like, well, I kind of want to check out Indiana Jones, but I don't want to pick it up on Xbox, and I'm going to wait for it to come to PlayStation, but it's not there yet. So maybe I'll just stream it and see what it's like. And I know people have done that. Same thing happened with Starfield. Anytime they seem to have these big launches, people just go, well, I'll just check it out on the cloud and I'll see what it's like. You know, I think there's going to be a lot of people like that. But when it comes to frame generation, I kind of feel like this is for people who have high-end rigs, 120, 240 refresh rate panels, and they want to kind of maximize what they can get out of it. I think to get from 30 to 60, that's where like FSR itself comes in, or DLSS or XeSS, where it tries to render out the game at a lower resolution, and then it upsamples and upscales using AI, or in the case of FSR, it's not really using AI. It's just like it's kind of like hand tuned by a human, to then kind of super sample it and get it on the screen. And then because it's running internally at lower resolution, it can pump out more frames because it's only got to render 540p instead of 1080p, that kind of thing. So I don't really know where frame generation settles in, but I think there is a space for it. AMD just needs to sort out the latency problem. And I think if they can sort the latency problem out in the same way that potentially NVIDIA has with something like Reflex, where it kind of predicts what you're going to do as a user next, then I think that's where they can kind of make some gains here, because I think that's why NVIDIA's tech is so far ahead in terms of the cloud as well. Like, everyone I've spoken to is like, your GeForce Now is the best. It looks the best, and it feels like it's running natively. And I think a large part of that is because of stuff like Reflex, where they are using AI to predict what the user's going to do. And they've
been working on it longer than anybody else.
Yeah,
you know,
very long.
The NVIDIA Shield came out when I was like a fucking junior in college. You know, it's like
crazy to think there.
You know, so it's like, yeah, it's like they planted their flag on this a long time ago. So it makes sense that they're ahead of the game. You know, I think they've been waiting for the tech to catch up with the idea, frankly, you know. And
yeah, I mean, you've only got to look at their latest cards. I don't know if you've seen, but like the size difference from like last gen's 40 series card to this gen's 50 series card. You know, we've gone from the chonker 3 slots or 2.5 slots down to like a normal size card again, because we're using more AI in order to achieve similar results or better results than we got on last generation's chips. So I really think that is where we're kind of driving. And I do think there is probably going to be in, say, the next generation of Steam Deck, there's probably going to be some kind of specific chip that's doing some kind of AI thing. I mean, we've seen that with the PlayStation 5 Pro, with their PSSR, and I kind of feel like the exclusive chips are what is the secret sauce for NVIDIA. They have their CUDA cores that are exclusively just doing the DLSS stuff. I'd imagine we're going to see something similar to that in the Switch 2, and I would expect to see Valve kind of follow suit with the Steam Deck 2 as well, because I kind of feel like that is really where the industry is driving towards, is kind of getting AI to do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Which I think makes sense, right? Like, obviously right now, AI is like a really hot button issue, like because of, you know, all of these like Silicon Valley companies shoving it where it doesn't belong. But like this is the exact
very different application though, to I can talk to a chat bot versus we can use this stuff to actually up-res imagery in real time.
Because that's the whole thing, right? Is that like it's so annoying. I hate Silicon Valley people creating problems where they don't exist. They love that move. But yeah, it's the idea that like what AI is good at is like replication and math and like menial tasks and things. Yeah, like that's what you want, right? Like you want, again, I brought up the smart delivery. That's the type of like hardware level solutions you want to see, because then it's not on the developer to handle it, right? Like the developer,
it's like Proton.
Like Proton. Exactly. It's a compatibility layer. Like it's a like, okay, you made this piece of software, it runs on our device then optimizes it for the device. It's like, that's great. Like that's an ideal solution if you get to a universe where that pans out and it like quote unquote just works, right? And like there's less effort needed to be put to port your game to any given platform, or like worry about like, oh, like I made this game with, you know, PC in mind, and we made a port that runs on PlayStation and Xbox, but we need to make a different one that runs for Nintendo. It's like, oh no, like there's this technology that can close the gap. It's like that. If we get to a point where it's that simple, that's an incredibly powerful tool, right? And it like really democratizes a lot of the like expense that goes into optimizing games, right? Like we talked about Doom Eternal and that running on Nintendo Switch on Nintendo Noise this week, and talking about how it's like, I mean, id showed like you could optimize those like games for Switch, but it's like also not fair to expect everybody to have the level of technological prowess that id has, right? So it's like getting to a point where like you can have these like, you know, system level tools, right? Or like being able to use AI to get more out of what you're making. It's like, I love the idea of like, you know, not needing to have like the best engineers in the industry in your office to get your game to run where you want it to run. You know, it's like that's really that I mean, can be really
feel
cool.
Like even with game engines, right, and them being taken out of proprietary engines in studios, and we've seen way more consolidation towards Unreal Engine. I mean, we're getting the best engineers in the world working at Epic and figuring out solutions for like global lighting, like Lumen or Nanite, for kind of the absolutely insane textures that we've seen. And so
that's the benefit, right? Of like, and I think that's why you see so many people using Unreal rather than proprietary engines, is like rather than spending R&D and time and money developing that tech, it's like you let one of the wealthiest companies in the, you know, space develop that technology and then license it out. And it's obviously, we've talked a lot about the dangers of that, right? And how like at any point Epic could be like, well, everybody uses this now, so we're going to jack up the you know, like the Adobe kind of model, right? And that's bad, obviously. But when you look at how much everyone using Unreal enables developers to spend more time creating rather than like,
and also like job security. I think about that a lot. It's like, oh, okay, I've just got laid off from this company, and we used Unreal,
So I
and
can go
now
to any
every
other
other
company that
studio in the
uses it.
world uses Unreal
Right.
now. So I can just be like, well, I've got 5 years of Unreal experience, so I'm just going to
Mm-hmm.
move over.
Yeah, and it's just like I don't know. To me, it's like, and this is like not a perfect analogy because I certainly don't want to imply that the developers like at studios that are developing proprietary engines and like they're obviously creatives as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we mentioned id, like the id tech engine and what they were able to achieve, like with Indiana Jones and
Mental.
with it's just like insane. And I know Doom's going to look phenomenal.
But what I like about that as a thing, right, is that like I think that developers should be free to make that decision, right? Like if you are an id or if you are, like even like Gorilla, right? Like made the Decima engine for Horizon. Like if you are a studio that's passionate about making your own engine to achieve a specific result or whatever, then like great, like do it. I think there's so many benefits to that and we've seen them. And I think that's like kind of part of the problem with AAA development is just like how much overhead there is and like the idea that like imagine if every time a painter wanted to paint they were like, well, I have to make the paint myself as well. Or if every time you wanted to like make a film you're like, well, I have to build a new camera, right? Or I have to update a camera.
Well, usually we're updating and building the camera while people are also developing on it. It's sort of like building the road while
like as you're driving on it. Yeah, or like a runway for a plane. It's like the plane needs to take off, man. Like I can't be putting the runway down as we're going,
But that is often the case. Like that, it's like, oh, we've got the new specs in for the PS5, and then Naughty Dog's, platform engineers get to work on actually building out the game engine alongside the developers who are still working on the game that is running on that engine, and they're getting updates every single day.
Meanwhile, people are trying to like get art assets wrangled and like all of the things that you don't think about that like are also part of working with an engine, right? Is like because like I know the chapter in Blood, Sweat, and Pixels about Dragon Age when they were like trying to work in the Frostbite engine and they're like, we're just making environments in this engine and we're like, we don't know what we're doing yet. It's like it can get so messy so quick, and I totally understand like why you want to consolidate and have hardware like level solutions, and like that is what I think is so interesting about this technology and like what it could mean in the future. Is just like, can we get to a point where NVIDIA is offering console manufacturers, PC developers, like, the same kinds of solutions that we look at on Xbox and applaud, right? And like, could you have, like a graphics card that has like, the ability to like just do things like that on its own, like being like, hey,
that's what I think about. It's like, what is Valve going to do to differentiate themselves from all of the other handhelds now that are going to be running SteamOS?
Yeah.
Or can they get their own special source like, Steam SR? And like they've got their Steam Super Resolution, but it only runs on Steam Deck because they've got their special chip.
Yes, exactly. Have you seen the patent for that just came out earlier this month about the Nintendo FSSR stuff, about like how that works?
No, I haven't.
It's really interesting. I'll send you the links because I wanna do an episode about it over on Nintendo Noise with you, and it basically like one of the things that they outlined in the patent, and it's worth pointing out that it's like it's a Nintendo patent, so it's like it's wide reaching and some of it is probably speculative, right? But one of the things that they talked about was that like what you could potentially do with this technology, right, is like, so say let's use Baldur's Gate as an example on Steam Deck, right? Because anybody who knows anything about how Baldur's Gate 3 ran on Steam Deck, right, is that like the first two chapters ran a lot better than the last chapter. The third chapter, when you get to the big city, right, that was, you'd see a lot of frame dropping, a lot of, issues with scale and everything that you didn't see in the earlier parts of the game when there was like just less going on the screen, right?
But also those were the parts of the game that were out in early access for 3 years before the game.
Yeah, that's true. It had a lot of time to be optimized. It's a great point. So, the patent kind of outlines this idea where like what you could potentially do is be like, so I'm on the Steam Deck. This is the Nintendo one, but let's just say it's on Steam Deck. And for the first section of the game, right, the Steam Deck itself is capable of delivering me the game at a stable 30 frames per second. All my levels are nice and stable. Like, it's not taxing on the machine, and it's not seeing frame dips. It's not like killing my battery like crazy. It's like, this is within the device's ability, right? And then you get to chapter 3 and you have that moment where the game opens up and then the hardware is able to like identify that is happening, that this is like a particularly labor intensive part of the game, and then it offloads the up-resing to the cloud so that it doesn't like, it's not limited by the limits of the hardware, which is an insanely fascinating idea. And like, again, could be, I'm not assuming that that's something that the Switch 2 is capable of, as much as like, I could see that being the type of thing we move toward in the future, right? Where it is like this almost like hybrid model of like, you have
that's what Microsoft's been talking about for years. I mean, remember Crackdown? It was like, oh, we're going to have all this stuff, and it's going to, some of it can only run with the power of Azure and the cloud, and only Microsoft could do this because we've got X, Y, and Z, and we've got all these data centers. I mean, obviously that didn't really come to fruition. But
I just think it was before. I think it was an idea ahead of its time. I think that's the kind of thing we will get to eventually, for sure. It's just a matter of like, how far are we from all the things we always saw, internet infrastructure, all that stuff. Sorry, what was that?
Kojima's meant to be doing stuff like that as well, isn't he?
Right,
like,
yeah.
This game, it's like stuff, you know, that uses cloud technology and things. So
yeah.
I'm really interested to see where things go. I think that's where the differentiators come from. We've had yet another generation where the boxes are pretty much the same between Xbox and PlayStation, and the differentiator was Game Pass. I don't think that's really worked out for Microsoft.
And software, right? But that's also a thing that we've seen that, like, you know, and I think that's a kind of a multifaceted argument as to why that's not as effective anymore. But I would argue that it's because budgets have ballooned. But yeah, I mean, like, that was the thing. And now it's like you're seeing both PlayStation and Xbox kind of be like, that's not the most viable strategy for us, right? That like it kind of sets certain games up for failure to make them platform exclusive. And it's like,
and PC's been ready there to suck them all up and get all of those games. You know, I still think PlayStation's going to go day and date at some point with PC, because I think they've seen how much money they can make there, and that it's not really cannibalized their sales. So I think they put their feet in, and I think at some point they're going to splash and just be like,
I think eventually that'll probably, you're probably right. Like,
especially
long-term,
considering Hiroki Totoki's just had a promotion. I'd imagine that he probably has something to say about that. You know, he formally said that we need to explore other platforms, and they did just that with PC and with Nintendo Switch last year, and I'd imagine they continue to do that.
You got to imagine the success of Helldivers was very much like okay, like,
it's like, oh, okay, this probably wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful if we hadn't launched on PC at the same time. So I think they'll continue to do that.
And to your point, I'm kind of increasingly coming around to the idea that, like, there's an argument to be made that selling it on PC day and date actually will improve console sales, because there'll be more word of mouth.
Yeah,
more people are playing it.
People are seeing it on Twitch and playing it, you know. And I think with multiplayer games, you have to do that. But
100%. But even with a single player game, I think like there's something to that. Like, you know, if you think about like, say like the next Spider-Man game, right, is like on PC day and date. It's like, I mean, it'll probably sell twice as many copies, and then everybody's
charge $70 for it,
and everybody's playing it and talking about it, and then that encourages more people to go pick it up. You know, I don't know. Yeah, I think you're probably right there. I don't think it's as imminent as I think you do, but because it's one of those things of like, if that's the case, why haven't we gotten a game announcement? But also, they haven't announced any new single player games in a while. So
who knows? They've also just announced yet another new CEO. So really, who knows what's happening at PlayStation?
Yeah, they're shuffling deck chairs on the, you know, I don't want to say the Titanic, because they're in a pretty good spot right now. But it is wild to think like how much we attribute it to Jim Ryan, who knows, but like, if not for his decisions, they would be in the exact same place, but they would have like a couple more $1 billion in cash, which is like oof, like that sucks,
Herman
man.
Hulse beat the drum of Concord many times, though. You know, he was a big believer in Concord, Herman, and I think that's not bode well for him.
Here's my thing. I think that overreading his comments about Concord is, and this is going to sound like I'm making a dig at you, but I'm not. I think that feels like a thought process that is ignorant to like how PR works.
No,
like,
yeah,
he's the president of the fucking, he's not going to come out and be like, oh, this game looks like trash.
He greenlit the game.
No, that's not possible. It was in development.
It's possible. How? He was head of PlayStation Studios for a very long time.
Not when it got greenlit, was he?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
He was head of PlayStation Studios. Then he became CEO, but he wasn't. He was like in charge of all of the studios at that period of time. And I also think, looking at that, I mean, this is completely off topic, but it very much looks like Japan wants to take control again, and they've kind of taken over the reins.
Yeah, which, I mean, that's fine, I think. I'm just trying to see when he took the job, because I thought it was later, but maybe you're right. Okay, he was VP in 2011 under Shuhei Yoshida. But I don't see when he took... He's president and CEO of PlayStation Studios since 2019. So, yeah, maybe that's on him. That's like, it's like right there though, right? Because that game was in development for 6 years. Yeah. So it's like, that might have been either one of his first decisions or one of the last decisions made before he took over. But either way,
possibly, yeah.
I'm not sitting here saying the guy is, above reproach, of course.
I mean, the studio got acquired in 2023, so I'd imagine that was Herman.
But the game was in development before it was acquired, is my point.
Yeah, but why would you look at a game that's bad and go, oh, you know what, we want to buy this studio? Like
I think that the dissolution of that game is more complicated, because like the idea that it like looked bad, it's like, well, I don't know that it did look bad, right? Like all the reviews were actually pretty positive. I think it was just like, I mean, it didn't show well. People immediately reacted to it poorly, but many of the people that actually played it, like the Steam reviews were even positive. Like, right? Like it was the gamers that were playing it that were complaining were like, nobody's playing this fucking game. Like the servers are totally empty.
Because nobody buys full price.
Yeah.
Multiplayer games anymore.
Totally.
And I don't know why they've not figured that out.
I agree. And that's, I guess, more my point there is like, did that game fail because it was not good or because it had a bad business model? It might be a little of both, but I don't, based on the reporting we did on it at the time, I don't know that it's that cut and dry is more the point I'm making there. But we're way down a rabbit hole about a lot of stuff, so we'll put a pin in it there, and we'll get into this battery conversation in just a second here. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the Steam Deck Podcast has been brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of January. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobe, Project Julian, Susan Still Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Voodoo Vic, Ty the Dude, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. Y'all the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, if you want to go check out those shows, the Nintendo Noise Podcast or the Flipscreen Games Podcast, you can get all that and much more by heading over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you'll find links to all the places we are, all over the web, all the cool stuff we're doing here at Flipscreen this year, however you choose to get involved. Thanks for tuning in and showing your support. All right, so let's talk about battery charge limits. So this is something that we have seen on a few other handhelds. I believe the ROG Ally already has this feature, if I'm not mistaken.
It does. I actually think it might be built into Windows, and so they've just got like an interface on top of it.
Gotcha.
Like, was it Armory Crate? I think that the Asus thing's called.
But just real quick, if the listener is not initiated, talk about what a battery charge limit is and why you might implement one.
Yeah, so you might actually have this on your phone. I have mine set on my phone to 95%.
I'm hardcore. I have mine set to 80. I'm like, no.
Okay. What this does essentially is it protects the longevity of your battery life. So as you go through charge cycles on a lithium-ion battery, it will slowly degrade. It won't hold as much capacity.
It's
It's why,
particularly bad if you're overcharging it, is the thing.
yes.
So if
So
it's
if
like
you,
plugged in when it's fully charged, or if you're constantly filling it to a full charge when it's not been depleted, those are all things that'll accelerate the battery's degradation.
So in order to combat that, a lot of these devices have caps now. So like I said, mine's at 95, Peter's at 80. The Steam Deck didn't ever have one. And a lot of people have been posting on Reddit. I've seen a bunch of stories about it, like PSA, don't keep your Steam Deck plugged in if you're not using it for a long period of
The
time, because
opposite is also true, is if you don't charge it enough, the Steam
it
Deck
will
battery
die.
degrades
Yeah.
really bad. Like I've started to see that with my original unit where the battery's starting to go.
So you kind of have to like keep it in balance. I would say like you can put it in, if you're not going to use it for a very long time. There is actually in the BIOS the kind of battery protection mode, which means it will kind of cut off and won't deplete the battery until you plug it back into a power source. You can't turn the Steam Deck on, so that's worth doing if you're putting in like storage, or it's just, say like P's got two and he's not really using his original. You can do that, but with this new charge limit functionality, they're just going to add a slider into the settings so you can set the max charge level. So if you wanted to have it at 80%, you can do that. 95%, you can do that kind of thing. This is going into SteamOS, which I think a lot of people didn't really consider, that this may be because the devices like the ROG Ally, the users have become accustomed to the fact that they've got the battery charge limit, and if they now install SteamOS on it, well, that feature goes away at the moment. So this kind of brings it back. I would expect this to be out around the same time that the beta download goes up. And I was curious, like, is this something you even use, Pete? I would imagine it is if you're using it on your phone.
Yeah, I think I would take advantage of it. I don't know if I'd be as aggressive on my handheld device, because the difference between like 80% and 100% is like, several minutes of gameplay, or even an hour of gameplay if
That's
I'm
like
playing
8 hours of Balatro.
Yeah, right. Yeah, or like Vampire Survivors, or something small like that. It's like that's like a plane flight, man. So I think I would probably be less aggressive, like maybe 95, 90, like you've got on yours. But yeah, no, this is something that like it's a really worthwhile PSA, which is why I wanted to talk about it, because like, yeah, like my phone can be I cannot charge it for 2 days and it still holds a charge. My smartwatch, I have the same thing where it's like I charge it like every 3 days. And I use it all the time.
I charge mine nightly because I wear it for 24 hours, but I only charge it for like 15 minutes, and I charge my watch to like 80%, and then it will last me again till the next night. And then I charge it to 80% again. I put it back on, it tracks my sleep, and I wake up and I kind of go like that. So like it is something you kind of have to get used to. Henry does, like on the old iPhones, it doesn't work. So Henry unplugs his phone overnight. He won't let it charge overnight, and he'll plug it in when he wakes up in the morning for a little bit.
I've started doing that now that I have a fast charger. I don't leave it plugged in overnight because the fast charger goes so quick. It's like I just plug it in. Like I'll charge it while I'm like not doing anything at night, and then I'll unplug it and let it sit overnight, and then if I need it in the morning or like in the middle of the day, I just pop it on the like while I'm like making myself breakfast or something, and it's like great.
By the time you're done, you're like, oh cool, I'm back up to 70%.
Yeah,
like,
totally. So yeah, I think this is a thing that everybody should take advantage of once it comes out. It can really, really dramatically extend the life of the batteries on your devices, and getting the battery replaced on your Steam Deck is like, it's like around $200 between. I mean, it's probably more like 150. I forget exactly. I looked it up the other day because mine was, like I said, mine's degrading. But you also need to like mail it away and not have it for a couple of weeks, and like obviously
it is a pretty accessible fix. So if you are confident about unscrewing some screws and taking a little bit of tape off, you can replace it yourself. It won't take you too long to do it. Like if I've replaced the fan in my old one. I think people replace the SSDs all the time. Those are more advanced than just taking the battery out. It's so accessible. Once you take that back off, you unplug it. There's like a little pull tab behind the battery, and iFixit sell replacements. You just put new glue down and stick it back in. So
maybe I'll give that a shot. So I'm gonna do a Daily Checkpoint about it over on Patreon next week, but I was at MagFest this weekend, and they had like they had a panel like teaching you how to solder, and I wasn't able to go, but I was like, fuck, I want to learn how to solder so bad. Like,
you never learned how to solder?
no,
Wow.
I don't know. Like, I don't
You
really.
got taught that in school.
Oh my God, please. We don't have time to talk about the things they don't teach us in American schools anymore.
Yeah, we got to that in school in in DT, which is design.
Yeah, I mean, please, they used to do stuff like that. I have a friend who like grew up in the town where I was like born and I moved away from, and like that, like they had a woodworking, like he makes furniture, and I'm like, what are you fucking kidding me? It's like I took a typing class.
Yeah.
I took a web design class that was useless. Like, it's like I would have much rather learned how to build
Microsoft Front Page or Dreamweaver. It's like,
it's like great. I learned how to use H tags instead of how to build a fucking chair. Like, that's so much cooler. Anyway.
I would have rather gone with the H tags. I probably would have taken that class rather than the furniture. But I get your point. My dad used to buy me little soldering kits when I was a kid as well, like when I was 11 or 12.
I really want to learn how to do it. I have a couple projects. Like I have my original Game Boy that I want to turn into an instrument. I have the like receiver from a telephone that was like in my grandparents' house when I was a kid that I want to turn into a microphone. Like I've got a couple fun little projects I want to try to get into. So maybe cracking open my base Steam Deck and trying to replace the battery is like a good way to like challenge myself to get a little more comfortable with tinkering.
I had so many of those projects I always wanted to do, and like some of the stuff's moved from my old house, and I moved last April to this house, and I've never touched it. It's still in a box. My favorite idea for a project I had was, those like Fisher Price phones, and it was turning one of those into like a Bluetooth thing that like connects to your phone, and like you can like press the buttons to like call and
That's
like
so
talk
funny.
to the little Fisher Price phone. I love those Fisher Price phones. They're so funny.
Yeah, we need them to cut your hours. we need this Fisher Price project. This is the type of insane stuff I miss. So yeah, I think this is one to keep an eye out for sure. This is one of those, like, when it comes to beta, definitely take advantage of it. This is something I definitely think you wanna do for your Steam Deck.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, gang. Well, if you want to let us know what you think about frame generation and how it will impact the future of Steam Deck, or if you want to write in with a question for next week's show, you can do that and much more by heading over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you'll find links to all of our sister shows, Nintendo Noise and the Flip Screen Games podcast. You'll find links to our Discord, our email address, so you can keep the conversation rolling between episodes or write into the show. And, of course, you'll find Patreon if you want to go above and beyond and show your support over there. However you choose to get involved, however you choose to be a member of the community, thank you for joining us here for another episode of the Steam Deck podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.